The autumn morning air carried an unusual chill through the corridors of Maricopa County Family Court, but nothing could match the ice-cold dread that settled in courtroom 3B as 3-year-old Emma Martinez was gently carried through the heavy oak doors. Her tiny frame seemed even smaller against the imposing backdrop of legal proceedings. Her fingers wrapped around a faded stuffed rabbit with such desperate intensity that her knuckles had turned ghost white. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Emma had spoken a single word to another human being. 6 months since that October night when her world shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces, leaving her trapped in a prison of silence that no key seemed able to unlock. Judge Patricia Williams had presided over family court for 23 years, witnessing every conceivable tragedy that could befall a family. She had seen children testify against abusive parents, watched marriages dissolve in bitter custody battles, and made decisions that would forever alter young lives. But something about the Martinez case made her hands tremble slightly as she opened the case file. Perhaps it was the photograph paper-clipped to the front page. Emma before the incident, her dark eyes sparkling with mischief, her gap-toothed smile radiating pure joy as she hugged that same stuffed rabbit in happier times. The courtroom fell into an unnatural hush as Linda Peterson, Emma's foster mother, carefully placed the child in the witness area. Peterson had fostered 47 children over 2 decades, each carrying their own wounds and stories. But Emma's silence was different. It wasn't defiance or fear of strangers. It was as if the child had simply decided that words were too dangerous to exist in her world anymore. "Emma, sweetheart," Linda whispered, smoothing the little girl's dark hair. That had been carefully braided that morning. "Remember what we talked about? These people just want to help." But Emma's glassy stare remained fixed on some invisible point beyond the American flag, beyond the wooden paneling, beyond the reach of anyone in that room. Dr. Sarachon approached, the bench with the measured steps of someone carrying devastating news. As the court-appointed child psychologist, she had spent countless hours trying to reach Emma through play therapy, art therapy, and every technique in her considerable arsenal. The woman who had successfully helped hundreds of traumatized children find their voices now faced her greatest professional challenge. "Your Honor," Dr. Chon began, her usually steady voice carrying an undertone of frustration and heartbreak. "In my 15 years specializing in childhood trauma, I have never encountered selective mutism this severe. Emma exhibits all the classic symptoms of witnessing extreme violence. Night terrors that leave her screaming, but still unable to speak. Catatonic episodes when she hears raised voices, and a complete withdrawal from verbal communication." Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh shifted in her seat, her sharp mind already calculating the implications. She had built her reputation as a fierce advocate for domestic violence victims, securing convictions in cases where others saw only lost causes. But how do you give voice to the voiceless? How do you seek justice for a victim who cannot testify to the truth she carries locked inside her 3-year-old heart? Across the aisle, defense attorney Michael Torres maintained his professional composure while internally wrestling with his own demons. 20 years of criminal defense had taught him to find reasonable doubt in the smallest details. But representing a man accused of nearly killing his wife in front of their toddler daughter challenged every moral fiber of his being. Still, everyone deserved representation, even monsters. David Martinez sat in the defendant's chair like a broken man. Gone was the confident construction foreman who had once commanded crews of workers. His shoulders, once broad and strong from years of manual labor, now curved inward with the weight of shame and regret. When Emma had been carried into the courtroom, he had half risen from his seat, hope flickering in his eyes that maybe, just maybe, his little princess would look at him the way she used to. But Emma's gaze passed right through him as if he were invisible, as if he had never existed at all. The man who had once been her entire world, who had taught her to ride a tricycle and had read Goodnight Moon countless times, now meant nothing to her traumatized mind. Perhaps that was the cruelest punishment of all. Detective Maria Rodriguez watched from the gallery, her trained eyes cataloging every detail, while her heart ached for the family she had failed to save. She would never forget that October night. Arriving at the modest duplex on Elm Street to find paramedics working frantically over an unconscious woman, while a blood-covered 3-year-old cowered under a bed, alive but unreachable. Rodriguez had knelt beside that bed for 20 minutes, speaking in the gentlest voice she could manage, but Emma had stared right through her with those haunted eyes. The witness in this case, Dr. Chun continued, experienced what we term complex trauma. She didn't just see violence. She was trapped in a room with it, covered in its aftermath, and left to process it with a 3-year-old's limited understanding of the world. Her mind has essentially created a protective barrier. Speaking in her subconscious understanding has become associated with danger. Judge Williams removed her reading glasses and studied Emma with the eyes of both a judge and a grandmother. The little girl sat perfectly still, occasionally bringing the stuffed rabbit closer to her face, as if drawing strength from its familiar scent. It was the only movement she made, the only acknowledgement that she was still present in her own body. Dr. Chun, Judge Williams asked quietly, what are her chances of recovery? Of ever being able to testify about what she witnessed? The pause that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Everyone in the courtroom, prosecutors, defense attorneys, family members, and court reporters, held their breath waiting for an answer that would determine not just the outcome of this case, but the future of a little girl who had already lost too much. Your Honor, Dr. Chun finally replied, her voice heavy with professional honesty. Without some kind of breakthrough, without finding a way to help Emma feel completely safe again, she may never speak about that night. And given the severity of her trauma, she may never speak again at all. The weight of those words settled over the courtroom like a suffocating blanket. Emma Martinez, the key witness to a brutal domestic violence case, remained locked in silence. And with her, the truth that could bring justice or set a dangerous man free. As Judge Williams called for recess, Emma continued staring into the distance, clutching her rabbit, carrying secrets that might never see the light of day. The quest to unlock her voice, and the truth that could save or destroy lives, was about to take an unexpected turn that no one in that courtroom could have imagined. The emergency meeting in Judge Williams' chambers felt more like a war council than a legal consultation. The mahogany-paneled room, usually reserved for quiet deliberations, buzzed with desperate energy as the key players in the Martinez case gathered around the polished conference table. Dr. Chun sat rigidly in her chair, her normally composed demeanor cracked by professional frustration. Prosecutor Walsh paced by the window, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor in an anxious rhythm that matched everyone's racing hearts. We're at a dead end, Dr. Chun admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've tried everything in my arsenal. Play therapy, art therapy, music therapy, even brought in specialists from Children's Hospital. Emma simply won't engage. It's as if she's built an impenetrable wall around herself. Defense attorney Torres leaned back in his leather chair, trying to mask his relief with professional concern. A mute witness was a defense attorney's dream, but even he couldn't ignore the human tragedy unfolding before them. Perhaps we need to accept that some cases simply cannot be prosecuted. The child's well-being should come first. Judge Williams was about to respond when the chamber door burst open with such force that it rattled the diplomas on the wall. Detective Maria Rodriguez stood in the doorway, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her badge catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows. In her eyes burned a fire that made everyone sit up straighter. I know you're all ready to give up, she announced breathlessly, still catching her breath from running up 3 flights of courthouse stairs. But I have an idea that's going to sound absolutely crazy. Walsh stopped pacing. Maria, this isn't the time for... Rex, Rodriguez interrupted, the single word hanging in the air like a lightning bolt. His name is Rex, and he might be our miracle. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Chun blinked several times, as if trying to process what she just heard. Torres looked genuinely confused, while Judge Williams leaned forward with the expression of someone who had just heard either the most brilliant or most ridiculous idea of her career. Detective Rodriguez, Judge Williams said slowly, would you care to elaborate? Rodriguez moved to the center of the room with the confidence of someone who had just discovered fire. Rex is a 4-year-old golden retriever with the Phoenix Police Department. But he's not just any K9. He's part of our victim assistance unit. This dog has been specially trained to work with traumatized witnesses, particularly children. A dog? Torres's voice cracked with disbelief. You want to bring a dog into my courtroom? Not just any dog, Rodriguez continued, pulling out her phone and swiping to a photograph that made everyone lean closer. The image showed a magnificent golden retriever sitting beside a young boy, both of them radiating calm and trust. Rex has worked with over 30 child witnesses in the past 2 years. Kids who couldn't speak to adults, who were too scared to testify, who had shut down completely, just like Emma. Dr. Chun's professional skepticism warred with desperate hope. Detective, while animal-assisted therapy has shown promise in clinical settings, bringing a police dog into a courtroom proceeding is revolutionary, Rodriguez finished. I know it sounds impossible, but last month in Oregon, a therapy dog helped a 5-year-old testify against her abuser. The precedent exists, Your Honor. We just need the courage to try it. The room erupted in simultaneous conversations. Walsh immediately saw the possibilities, her prosecutor's mind already calculating how this could change everything. Torres began formulating objections, his legal training screaming that this was unprecedented and potentially prejudicial. Dr. Chun found herself genuinely intrigued despite her reservations. This is absurd. Torres finally exploded, rising from his chair with such force that it rolled backward into the bookshelf. We're talking about a murder trial, not some feel-good television special. You want to turn my courtroom into a petting zoo? Your courtroom? Judge Williams raised an eyebrow that could have frozen fire. Mr. Torres, I believe this is still my courtroom. Rodriguez pressed her advantage. Rex isn't just trained to be friendly with children. He's trained to recognize trauma responses, to approach slowly, to provide comfort without overwhelming. His handler, Officer Tom Bradley, is a certified victim advocate with a psychology degree. They've worked with the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and 3 other states are implementing similar programs. But the legal precedent, Torres began, is evolving, Walsh interjected, pulling out her tablet and scrolling through legal databases with practiced fingers. Arizona Revised Statute 8451 allows for reasonable accommodations to reduce trauma to child witnesses. If we can argue that Rex constitutes such an accommodation, Dr. Chun found herself nodding slowly. There is substantial research supporting animal-assisted interventions for trauma victims. Dogs, particularly those with specialized training, can lower cortisol levels, reduce anxiety, and create a sense of safety that human contact cannot achieve in severely traumatized individuals. But Emma hasn't responded to anything or anyone. Torres argued desperately. What makes you think a dog will be different? Rodriguez's smile was filled with quiet confidence. Because Rex doesn't ask questions. He doesn't want her to remember painful things. He doesn't represent the adult world that failed to protect her. To Emma, Rex would just be a friend who asks for nothing except maybe a pet or a gentle word. The chamber fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. Through the tall windows, they could see the courthouse plaza, where families navigated their own legal battles, where children clung to parents' hands while walking toward uncertain futures. Judge Williams stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. 23 years of family law had taught her that sometimes the most unconventional solutions yielded the most profound results. She thought of Emma, sitting in that foster home, still clutching her rabbit, still trapped in silence. "Detective Rodriguez," she said without turning around, "tell me about Rex's success rate." 87% of children who work with Rex eventually provide some form of testimony or evidence. Not all of them testify in court, but they talk. They heal. They find their voices again. Torres made one final attempt. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The appeals court will see that we exhausted every reasonable option to help a traumatized child witness." Judge Williams interrupted, turning back to face the room. "And if Rex can help Emma find her voice, then we owe it to her and to her mother to try." Rodriguez felt her heart leap as she recognized the decision forming in the judge's eyes. "Your Honor, Rex and Officer Bradley could be here tomorrow morning. Make it happen, Detective." Judge Williams's voice carried the authority of someone who had just made a decision that could change legal history. "We're going to try something that's never been done in this courthouse before." As the meeting adjourned and everyone filed out with varying degrees of excitement and apprehension, none of them could have predicted that in less than 24 hours, two simple words would echo through that courtroom and change everything. They thought they knew about justice, healing, and the power of an unlikely friendship. The stage was set for a miracle or a disaster. Only time would tell which one Rex would deliver. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Officer Tom Bradley approached the imposing limestone building with his most important partner by his side. Rex, a magnificent 4-year-old golden retriever, walked with the calm dignity that came from 2 years of specialized training and countless hours working with society's most vulnerable victims. His golden coat gleamed in the early light, and his gentle brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. Bradley paused at the courthouse entrance, adjusting his dress uniform one final time. 20 years of police work had prepared him for many things, but walking into a murder trial with a therapy dog was uncharted territory even for him. "You ready for this, boy?" he whispered to Rex, who looked up at him with absolute trust and wagged his tail once, their signal that he understood something important was about to happen. Inside courtroom 3B, the atmosphere crackled with nervous anticipation. Word had spread through the courthouse overnight about Judge Williams' unprecedented decision, and the gallery was packed with curious observers, court reporters from other divisions, law clerks, and even a few attorneys who had rearranged their schedules just to witness legal history in the making. Dr. Chun sat in her usual spot behind the prosecution table, but her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her notes. She had spent half the night researching animal-assisted therapy protocols, trying to prepare for something no textbook had ever covered. Beside her, Prosecutor Walsh checked her phone obsessively, second-guessing the decision that could either revolutionize her case or destroy it completely. Defense Attorney Torres looked like a man preparing for battle. He had spent the entire evening crafting objections and researching appeal grounds, convinced that his client's constitutional rights were about to be trampled by a publicity stunt. His briefcase bulged with precedent cases and constitutional arguments, ready to unleash legal warfare if necessary. Emma sat in the witness area with foster mother Linda Peterson, still clutching her threadbare rabbit. But something was different. This morning, there was a restlessness to her stillness, as if some primitive part of her mind sensed the change was coming. Her dark eyes, usually fixed on distant nothings, seemed to flicker occasionally toward the courtroom doors. The whispers died instantly when those doors opened and Officer Bradley stepped inside. Behind him, Rex entered with the measured pace of a professional who understood the gravity of his surroundings. The golden retriever's presence seemed to fill the entire courtroom, not with overwhelming energy, but with a calm serenity that made even the most skeptical observers pause. "Jesus Christ," Bailiff Robert Hayes muttered under his breath, then immediately looked around to make sure Judge Williams hadn't heard him. In 20 years of courthouse duty, he had seen everything from defendants collapsing in seizures to attorneys throwing punches, but he had never seen a dog walk into his courtroom with more dignity than most humans. Rex's training was immediately evident. Despite the dozens of strangers staring at him, despite the unfamiliar sounds and smells of the courthouse, he remained focused entirely on his handler, waiting for direction. His tail wagged gently, but he made no attempt to greet anyone or explore his surroundings. This was work, and Rex understood work. Officer Bradley approached the bench where Judge Williams waited with visible nervousness. "Your Honor, this is Rex. He's been briefed on the situation and is ready to assist however you deem appropriate." The judge studied the dog with frank curiosity. She had owned dogs her entire life, but there was something different about Rex, an alertness, a purposefulness that spoke of extensive training and natural talent. "Officer Bradley, walk me through how this typically works." Rex has been trained to read human emotional states, particularly stress and trauma responses, Bradley explained, his voice carrying the confidence of expertise. He approaches slowly, never forcing contact, and allows the witness to set all boundaries. His presence alone often reduces cortisol levels and creates a sense of safety that enables communication. Torres rose like a rocket. "Your Honor, I object to this entire proceeding. This is a murder trial, not therapy session. My client has a right to face his accuser in a court of law, not a circus ring." Before Judge Williams could respond, something remarkable happened. At the sound of Torres' raised voice, Emma's reaction was swift and predictable. She began to curl into her familiar protective position, bringing her knees to her chest and burying her face in her rabbit. The same response they had seen dozens of times when anyone spoke too loudly or too aggressively. But Rex, without any command from his handler, immediately turned toward Emma, not with the eager enthusiasm of a pet seeking attention, but with the measured concern of a trained professional recognizing someone in distress. He took 3 slow steps toward her, then lay down on the courtroom floor, approximately 6 feet away, positioning himself between Emma and the source of the loud voices. The courtroom fell silent as everyone watched this remarkable display of intuitive intelligence. Emma, still curled in her protective position, slowly raised her head just enough to peer over her rabbit. For the first time in 6 months, her eyes focused on something in the present moment, the golden dog who had somehow understood her fear and positioned himself as a gentle guardian. Dr. Chun felt her breath catch in her throat. "Your Honor, may I approach?" At the judge's nod, she moved slowly toward Emma and Rex. This behavior is extraordinary. Rex has essentially demonstrated textbook trauma-informed response without any human direction. Officer Bradley nodded with professional pride. He's trained to recognize when someone needs space versus when they need comfort. Right now, he's offering protection and stability without overwhelming her. Emma's foster mother, Linda Peterson, whispered in amazement. She's looking at him. Really looking, not just staring through everything like she usually does. Even David Martinez, Emma's father, stopped his frantic, whispering to his attorney to watch his daughter's first genuine reaction to anything since his arrest. A complex mix of hope and guilt crossed his weathered face as he witnessed his child, showing the first signs of engagement he had seen in months. Rex remained perfectly still, his gentle breathing the only movement in the silent courtroom. But his eyes never left Emma. and something in his calm presence seemed to communicate a message that transcended human language. You are safe. I am here. You can trust me. Judge Williams looked around the courtroom, taking in the faces of everyone present. The skeptics were becoming believers. The believers were becoming hopeful. And in the center of it all, a traumatized little girl was taking her first tentative steps back toward the world of the living. Mr. Torres, she said quietly, your objection is noted for the record, but I'm going to allow this to proceed. Rex will remain in the courtroom. As the morning session continued, Emma never took her eyes off the golden dog who had somehow understood what no human could reach, that sometimes healing begins not with words or therapy or legal proceedings, but with the simple presence of someone who asks for nothing but offers everything. The miracle was beginning to unfold, one gentle breath at a time. The courthouse clock ticked away the morning minutes with agonizing precision as the most unusual dance in legal history began to unfold. Emma Martinez, still perched in the witness area like a frightened bird, had not looked away from Rex for over an hour. The golden retriever remained exactly where he had positioned himself, close enough to provide comfort, far enough to avoid overwhelming her fragile emotional state. Officer Bradley sat quietly in the gallery, his trained eyes monitoring both his canine partner and the little girl whose life hung in the balance. He had seen Rex work with traumatized children before, but never in circumstances quite like these. The courtroom setting, with its formal atmosphere and dozens of watching eyes, should have made Rex's job nearly impossible. Yet somehow, the dog seemed to understand the gravity of the moment with an intelligence that bordered on supernatural. Dr. Chun had abandoned all pretense of taking notes. Instead, she watched with the fascination of a scientist observing a rare phenomenon. Emma's body language was changing in subtle but significant ways. Her death grip on the stuffed rabbit had loosened slightly. Her rigid posture had softened, just enough to suggest she was no longer in full defensive mode. Most remarkably, her breathing had synchronized with Rex's, the steady rhythm visibly calming her nervous system. This is extraordinary, she whispered to Prosecutor Walsh. Emma hasn't shown this level of engagement with any living being since the incident. Rex is essentially providing what we call co-regulation, helping her nervous system find stability through his presence. Judge Williams had called a brief recess, but nobody moved. The entire courtroom seemed spellbound by the delicate interaction playing out before them. Court reporter Janet Mills found herself holding her breath, her fingers poised over silent keys as she witnessed something that transcended the usual boundaries of legal proceedings. Emma's foster mother, Linda Peterson, pressed a tissue to her eyes as she watched the child she had come to love take tiny steps back toward the world. In 6 months of patient care, she had never seen Emma show genuine interest in anything or anyone. Now, watching her study Rex with such focused attention, Linda dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, the real Emma was still in there somewhere. Even defense attorney Torres found himself captivated despite his legal objections. His client, David Martinez, sat transfixed in the defendant's chair, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched his daughter show signs of life for the first time since that terrible October night. The man who had destroyed his family with his own hands was witnessing what might be the first step in his daughter's healing, a healing he had made necessary. Rex, sensing the intensity of Emma's focus, made his first deliberate move. With the slow precision of a trained professional, he shifted position slightly, not moving closer, but simply adjusting his posture to face her more directly. His tail moved once, not an excited wag, but a gentle acknowledgement that he saw her seeing him. Emma's reaction was immediate and profound. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in months, her mouth opened slightly as if she might speak. The sound that emerged wasn't words, but it was intentional, a soft exhale that sounded almost like wonder. It was the first vocalization anyone had heard from her since that night, and its impact on the courtroom was electric. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward in her seat, her heart racing with the recognition that they were witnessing something unprecedented. In all her years of police work, she had never seen anything like this gentle breakthrough. Rex wasn't just providing comfort. He was somehow communicating with Emma on a level that bypassed her trauma and reached directly to the part of her that still wanted to connect with the world. Bailiff Robert Hayes, a man not given to emotional displays, found himself wiping his eyes as he watched the interaction. 20 years of courthouse security had shown him humanity at its worst. The violence, the betrayals, the broken families that paraded through these halls daily. But this moment, this impossible connection between a traumatized child and a therapy dog, reminded him why justice mattered, why healing was possible, why hope was never truly lost. Emma's next move stunned everyone in the room. Still clutching her rabbit, she slowly slid forward in her chair, her feet touching the floor for the first time during any court session. Rex remained perfectly still, but his entire body language conveyed patient encouragement. "Take your time," his stillness seemed to say. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Chun could barely contain her professional excitement. "Your Honor," she whispered. "This is a breakthrough of unprecedented magnitude. Emma is demonstrating agency, making choices, taking initiative. This is exactly the kind of progress we've been hoping for." Step by tiny step, Emma began to move toward Rex. Each movement was deliberate, carefully considered, as if she was navigating a minefield of her own fears. The stuffed rabbit came with her, but her grip had relaxed enough to suggest it was no comfort rather than desperate security. Rex's training was evident in every fiber of his being. As Emma approached, he remained in his lying position, making himself as non-threatening as possible. His breathing stayed calm and steady, providing the emotional anchor Emma needed to continue her journey across the seemingly vast space between them. The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma stopped just 3 feet from Rex. She studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle, perhaps seeing something there that reminded her of safety, of love, of the world that existed before everything fell apart. Then, in a gesture that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come, Emma extended one small hand toward Rex, not to touch him. She wasn't ready for that yet, but simply to reach toward him, to bridge the gap between isolation and connection. Rex's response was perfect in its simplicity. He lifted his head just slightly, acknowledging her gesture without making any move that might frighten her. His tail swept the floor once, a gentle greeting that seemed to say, "Hello, Emma. I see you. You're safe with me." Officer Bradley felt his throat tighten with emotion. In 2 years of working with Rex, he had seen the dog perform miracles, but this felt different. This felt like watching a soul come back to life. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Emma remained near Rex, neither advancing nor retreating. She was finding her courage, building her trust, preparing for something that no one in that courtroom could have predicted. The dance of healing had begun, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would change not just Emma's life, but the very definition of what justice could look like when compassion led the way. The stage was set for the most important words ever spoken in courtroom 3B, words that would echo through legal history and prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power. The afternoon light filtering through the tall courtroom windows had shifted twice since Emma first approached Rex, casting different shadows across the scene that had mesmerized everyone present. What started as a tentative dance of trust had evolved into something deeper, a connection that transcended the boundaries between species, between trauma and healing, between silence and the desperate need to communicate. Emma had been sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Rex for nearly an hour, her small hand resting lightly on his golden fur. The stuffed rabbit lay forgotten in her lap, the first time she had released her death grip on it since that October night. Rex remained perfectly still, his steady breathing creating a rhythm of calm that seemed to envelop the entire courtroom in a cocoon of hushed anticipation. Dr. Chun monitored every micro-expression, every slight shift in Emma's posture, documenting what she knew would become a landmark case study in trauma therapy. The child's transformation was remarkable. Her face had lost the haunted, distant look that had defined her for months, replaced by something resembling peace. Her fingers moved gently through Rex's coat, with the wonder of someone rediscovering touch, connection, trust. Judge Williams had canceled all other proceedings for the day, understanding intuitively that they were witnessing something that couldn't be rushed or interrupted. The gallery remained packed, despite the passing hours, with people afraid to leave lest they missed the moment when everything changed. Court personnel who should have gone home hours ago lingered in doorways and corners, drawn by the same magnetic pull that kept everyone's eyes fixed on the little girl and her unlikely companion. Officer Bradley sat in quiet amazement at Rex's intuitive responses. The dog seemed to understand that this wasn't just another assignment. This was a child's soul hanging in the balance. Every movement Rex made was calculated to provide maximum comfort with minimal pressure. When Emma's breathing quickened, with fleeting anxiety, Rex would adjust his position slightly, somehow sensing exactly what she needed. When she grew still with exhaustion, he would shift to provide a more comfortable resting spot. Foster mother Linda Peterson had stopped trying to hide her tears. In 6 months of round-the-clock care, she had never seen Emma show this level of engagement with anything or anyone. The woman who had fostered 47 children knew the difference between progress and breakthrough, and this was definitely breakthrough territory. David Martinez watched his daughter with a complex mixture of emotions that threatened to tear his heart apart. Hope, because Emma was finally responding to something. Guilt, because he was the reason she needed to heal in the first place. Grief, because the child touching that dog with such gentle wonder bore little resemblance to the chattering, laughing daughter he remembered. She was finding her way back to the world, but would there ever be a place in that world for him? Defense attorney Torres had long since abandoned his legal objections. Whatever precedent this was setting, whatever constitutional issues it might raise, paled in comparison to the human drama unfolding before his eyes. He was witnessing the resurrection of a child's spirit, and even his cynical lawyer's heart couldn't remain unmoved by the profound beauty of it. Detective Rodriguez felt vindicated in her faith in Rex's abilities, but more than that, she felt a deep sense of rightness about what's happening. Too often in police work, she saw the aftermath of violence with no opportunity to witness healing. This moment was a rare gift, seeing the other side of the story, where hope conquered despair and connection triumphed over isolation. As the courthouse clock chimed 4 o'clock, something shifted in the energy of the room. Emma, who had been contentedly stroking Rex's fur, suddenly became more alert. Her dark eyes, which had been focused on the dog, lifted to scan the faces of the people watching her. For the first time since that terrible night, she seemed truly present in her own life, aware of her surroundings, conscious of the dozens of adults who had been waiting for months to hear her voice. Rex sensed the change immediately. His ears perked up slightly, and his tail moved in the barest suggestion of a wag. Something was coming. They could all feel it in the charged atmosphere of the courtroom. Emma's lips parted slightly, and everyone leaned forward without realizing it. Dr. Chun gripped her pen so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Prosecutor Walsh held her breath. Judge Williams removed her reading glasses, afraid that any movement might break the spell that was building to its crescendo. The little girl looked down at Rex, studying his gentle brown eyes with the intensity of someone making a monumental decision. Her small hand continued its gentle stroking motion, and something in her face began to change. The last barriers of fear and protection finally crumbling under the weight of trust and safety that Rex provided. Then it happened. In a voice so soft it was barely above a whisper, but clear enough to carry across the absolute silence of the courtroom, Emma spoke her first words in 6 months. "Good boy." The impact was seismic. The gasp that erupted from the gallery was so loud, echoed off the walls like a collective exhale of held breath. Court reporter Janet Mills' hands flew to her mouth, her professional composure shattered by the raw emotion of the moment. Bailiff Robert Hayes, a 20-year veteran who prided himself on having seen everything, felt goosebumps cover his entire body as if he'd been struck by lightning. Dr. Chun's pen clattered to the floor as tears streamed down her face. In 15 years of working with traumatized children, she had never witnessed a breakthrough so profound, so complete, so absolutely perfect in its simplicity. Foster mother Linda Peterson sobbed openly, her hands pressed to her heart as if to keep it from breaking with joy. 6 months of patient love and care had led to this moment, the return of Emma's voice. Even hardened Detective Rodriguez found herself crying, thinking of that blood-covered child she had found under the bed, and marveling at the resilience of the human spirit. But perhaps the most profound reaction came from David Martinez. The man who had destroyed his family with his own violence collapsed forward in his chair, his shoulders shaking with sobs that came from the deepest parts of his soul. Hearing his daughter's voice, sweet, innocent, trusting, after months of silence, was both a gift and a judgment. She could speak. She had found her way back to words. But would she ever speak to him again? Rex, the catalyst for this miracle, simply looked up at Emma with his gentle brown eyes and wagged his tail once. "Good girl," his expression seemed to say. "You did it? You found your voice." Judge Williams wiped her eyes and tried to restore order to her courtroom. But she knew that what had just happened transcended law, transcended procedure, transcended everything she thought she knew about justice and healing. 2 words, "Good boy," had shattered 6 months of silence and opened the door to truth, healing, and the possibility of justice. The real breakthrough was just beginning. The courtroom transformation in the hours following Emma's breakthrough was nothing short of miraculous. What had been a sterile legal proceeding became something resembling a sanctuary, with Rex serving as an unlikely priest, helping a small congregation witness the return of a lost soul. Emma, emboldened by her successful first words, had begun whispering to Rex with increasing frequency, her voice so soft that only Dr. Chun, positioned carefully nearby, could catch the fragments. "He was so loud," Emma murmured into Rex's golden fur, her small fingers working through his coat as if weaving her memories into something she could finally release. "Louder than thunder. Louder than the scary movies Daddy used to watch when he thought I was sleeping." Dr. Chun's hand trembled. As she took notes, each whispered revelation more heartbreaking than the last. The clinical part of her mind cataloged the significance. Emma was processing trauma, verbalizing experience, beginning the crucial work of making sense of what had happened to her. The human part of her wanted to wrap this brave little girl in her arms and promise that no one would ever hurt her again. Judge Williams had cleared the courtroom of all but essential personnel, understanding instinctively that Emma's testimony needed to unfold in as safe an environment as possible. The gallery now held only immediate family members, key legal staff, and the handful of professionals whose presence was absolutely necessary. Even the court reporter had been positioned at a distance to avoid intimidating the child witness. Rex remained Emma's anchor throughout the process, his steady breathing and warm presence providing the security she needed to venture into the dark corners of her memory. Officer Bradley watched his partner with professional pride and personal amazement. In 2 years of working together, he had never seen Rex demonstrate such intuitive understanding of a witness's needs. The dog seemed to know exactly when to shift position to provide comfort, when to remain perfectly still to avoid disrupting Emma's thought process. Mommy was making the sad sounds, Emma continued, her voice barely above a breath. The ones she made when she watched the movies about princesses who got hurt. But this time it was real hurting, not pretend hurting. Foster mother Linda Peterson pressed tissues to her eyes, her heart breaking as she heard the child she loved describe the night that changed everything. The innocent way Emma processed such violence, comparing it to movies, trying to understand the difference between pretend and real, highlighted the devastating impact of what she had witnessed. Prosecutor Walsh listened to Dr. Chon's whispered translations with growing excitement and heartbreak. Each of Emma's revelations corroborated physical evidence they had collected from the scene: the broken lamp, the blood stains on the bedroom wall, the 911 call from a neighbor reporting screams. But hearing it through the words of a 3-year-old witness gave the evidence a devastating emotional weight that no forensic report could match. "I hide it under my bed like we practiced," Emma whispered, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone that children use when describing something they've been taught. "Mommy said if Daddy gets scary mad, I should hide under my bed and be quiet like a mouse. So I did, but I could still see through the crack." The revelation that Emma's mother had prepared her for this possibility sent shockwaves through the legal team. It painted a picture of ongoing domestic violence, of a mother who knew her husband was dangerous enough that she had trained their toddler daughter in survival tactics. Defense attorney Torres felt his case crumbling with each whispered word, but even he couldn't bring himself to interrupt this fragile process. David Martinez sat in the defendant's chair like a man witnessing his own judgment day. Hearing his daughter describe his violence in her innocent, childlike terms was more devastating than any sentence a judge could impose. She spoke of him as Daddy, even while describing his terrifying behavior, and that combination of love and fear in her words cut deeper than any blade. "Daddy threw the lamp at the wall," Emma continued, her small hand never stopping its gentle motion through Rex's fur. "It made a big crash sound, and then Mommy fell down. She wouldn't get up, even when I called her name real quiet." Detective Rodriguez took careful notes, knowing that Emma's testimony could be crucial for the prosecution. But she also found herself marveling at the child's resilience. Despite everything she had witnessed, Emma was finding the courage to speak truth. Rex deserved much of the credit, but the bravery belonged entirely to the little girl who had survived the unthinkable. Dr. Chun leaned closer as Emma's voice grew even softer. "There was red stuff everywhere. On Mommy's face, on my pajamas, on my hands when I tried to wake her up. I thought maybe it was like when I fell and got a boo-boo, but this was too much red stuff for just a boo-boo." The clinical description of blood through a child's eyes was perhaps the most chilling testimony anyone in that courtroom had ever heard. Emma wasn't trying to be dramatic or emotional. She was simply describing what she had seen with the limited vocabulary and understanding of a 3-year-old. The innocence of her language made the violence she described even more horrific. "I stayed under the bed until the loud sirens came," Emma whispered, her voice growing tired as she relived the longest night of her young life. "I wanted to help Mommy, but she told me to be quiet like a mouse if Daddy got scary mad. So I was the quietest mouse in the whole world." Rex seemed to sense Emma's exhaustion and shifted slightly to provide better support as she leaned against him. His training had prepared him for many situations, but the depth of trauma this child was processing would have challenged any therapy professional. Yet he remained constant, reliable, offering the unconditional acceptance that Emma needed to continue her journey toward healing. Judge Williams watched the proceedings with profound emotion. In 23 years on the bench, she had never presided over testimony quite like this. Emma wasn't just a witness. She was a survivor finding her voice a child reclaiming her power after months of silence. The legal implications were significant, but the human triumph was immeasurable. As the afternoon wore on, Emma's whispers continued to paint a devastating picture of domestic violence witnessed through innocent eyes. Each revelation brought them closer to justice, but more importantly, each word spoken brought Emma closer to healing. The truth was finally emerging, carried on the whispers of a brave little girl who had found her voice through the unconditional love of an extraordinary dog. And everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would change, not just this case, but their understanding of what justice and healing could look like when compassion led the way. The hardest truths were yet to come, but Emma had proven she had the courage to speak them. With Rex by her side, she was ready to tell the world exactly what her father had done that terrible October night. The setting sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Emma's whispered testimony reached its most devastating crescendo. 3 days had passed since her breakthrough, and with each session, her trust in Rex had deepened, allowing her to venture into the darkest corners of that October night. Dr. Chun had documented every word, every pause, every tremor in the little girl's voice as she painted a picture of violence that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. After Mommy stopped making the sad sounds, Emma whispered, her small face pressed against Rex's golden fur, as if drawing strength from his warmth, Daddy got real quiet too. That scared me more than the loud noises. The quiet was ... wrong quiet. Rex remained perfectly still, his gentle breathing the only sound in the hushed courtroom. Officer Bradley watched his partner with profound respect, recognizing that the dog was providing something no human therapist could match: complete acceptance without judgment, comfort without demands, presence without agenda. Judge Williams had made the unprecedented decision to allow Emma's testimony to continue over multiple sessions, understanding that rushing this process could re-traumatize the child and potentially invalidate everything they had gained. The legal community was watching closely, knowing that the outcome of this case could revolutionize how traumatized children were handled in courtrooms across the nation. Emma's voice grew even softer, requiring Dr. Chun to lean closer to catch her words. I heard Daddy walking around upstairs. His feet were making the creaky sounds on the floor, but different than normal. Like he was ... heavy. Sadder heavy. The prosecutor, Jennifer Walsh, felt her chest tighten as she realized what Emma was describing, the period after the assault when David Martinez had apparently surveyed the damage he had inflicted on his wife. The child's innocent interpretation of her father's emotional state, as sadder heavy, revealed a complexity to the incident that pure violence couldn't explain. Defense attorney Torres had long since abandoned any pretense of objection. His client's fate was being sealed by whispered words from a 3-year-old, but even his professional obligation to defend couldn't override his human recognition of the truth being revealed. David Martinez wasn't just guilty of assault. He was guilty of destroying his daughter's childhood, her sense of safety, her ability to trust the world around her. Then Daddy came to my room, Emma continued, her grip on Rex's fur tightening slightly. I thought maybe he was going to read me a story like before, when he wasn't scary mad. But he just stood in the doorway, making the crying sounds that grown-ups make when they think nobody's listening. The image of David Martinez standing in his daughter's doorway, weeping over what he had done while she hid terrified under her bed, added a layer of tragic complexity to the case that nobody had anticipated. Emma's testimony wasn't just establishing guilt. It was revealing the full human cost of domestic violence on every member of the family. Detective Rodriguez found herself gripping her notebook so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. In 15 years of investigating domestic violence cases, she had seen the aftermath countless times, but never through the eyes of such a young witness. Emma's perspective revealed details that crime scene photos and forensic reports could never capture: the emotional landscape of terror that surrounded the physical violence. Emma's breathing became more labored as she approached the most difficult part of her story. Rex, sensing her distress, shifted position slightly to provide better support, his movement so subtle that it seemed more like natural settling than deliberate action. The therapy dog's intuitive understanding of trauma response was evident in every gesture. "I heard the siren cars coming," Emma whispered, her voice taking on the breathless quality of remembered fear. "Daddy heard them too, because he made a scared sound and ran to the window. Then he came back to my room, and he saw me under the bed." The courtroom held its collective breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for: the direct interaction between Emma and her father in the immediate aftermath of the assault. Dr. Chun leaned forward, knowing that whatever came next would likely be the most crucial testimony of the entire case. Emma's voice dropped to barely audible levels. Daddy got down on the floor and looked at me under the bed. His face had the red stuff on it too, and his eyes were all puffy, like when I cry too hard. He said, ... He said, "Emma, baby, don't tell the police people that Daddy was here tonight. Can you do that for Daddy? Can you be Daddy's special secret keeper?" The gasp that rippled through the courtroom was audible. What Emma had just described wasn't just assault. It was witness tampering, an attempt to coerce a 3-year-old into lying to law enforcement. The legal implications were staggering, but the human implications were even worse. A father had looked into his terrified daughter's eyes and asked her to protect him from the consequences of his violence. David Martinez's reaction to hearing his own words repeated by his daughter was complete collapse. The man who had once commanded construction crews crumpled in his chair, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that came from the deepest parts of his soul. His attorney placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, but even professional support couldn't shore up a man confronting the full weight of his actions through his child's innocent recounting. Foster mother Linda Peterson wept openly, her heart breaking for the little girl who had been asked to carry such an impossible burden. The woman who had fostered dozens of traumatized children recognized that Emma's 6 months of silence hadn't just been trauma response, it had been the confused attempt of a 3-year-old to keep a promise to her father, even after witnessing his violence against her mother. "I tried to be the special secret keeper," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she relieved herself of this terrible burden. "But Rex makes me feel safe to tell the truth. Mommy always said telling the truth is important, even when it's scary." Dr. Chun felt tears streaming down her face as she documented these final, crucial words. Emma hadn't just been traumatized by witnessing violence. She had been carrying the additional burden of forced complicity, asked to protect her abuser at the expense of justice for her mother. Judge Williams removed her reading glasses and wiped her eyes, knowing that what she had just witnessed would change her understanding of domestic violence forever. Emma's testimony had revealed layers of manipulation and psychological abuse that extended far beyond the physical assault. The case was no longer just about one night of violence. It was about the systematic destruction of a family and the courage of a child who found the strength to speak truth. As Emma's whispered testimony concluded, everyone in the courtroom understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented. A 3-year-old had not only found her voice after months of traumatic silence, but had delivered testimony that would ensure justice for her mother and protection for herself. The truth had been spoken, carried on the whispers of a brave little girl who had learned that secrets designed to protect abusers only enable more abuse. With Rex by her side, Emma had chosen truth over fear, justice over silence, and healing over the continued protection of the man who had shattered her world. The final chapter of this extraordinary case was about to unfold, and everyone present knew that justice, healing, and hope were finally within reach. 6 months after Emma Martinez spoke her first words in courtroom 3B, she stood confidently at a podium in the Arizona State Legislature, her voice clear and strong as she addressed a room full of lawmakers who had gathered to hear the most famous 3-year-old witness in American legal history. Beside her, as always, sat Rex, no longer just a therapy dog, but a symbol of hope and healing that had captured the nation's heart. "My name is Emma Martinez," she began, her small hands gripping the microphone with the same determination she had once reserved for her stuffed rabbit. "And this is my best friend Rex. He helped me find my voice when the scary things made me too quiet to talk." The transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Gone was the hollow-eyed, silent child who had been carried into that courtroom months earlier. In her place stood a confident little girl with sparkling eyes and a voice that carried the power to change laws, influence policy, and inspire a nation to rethink how it treated its most vulnerable witnesses. The journey to this moment had been neither quick nor easy. David Martinez had ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included 15 years in prison for aggravated assault, domestic violence, and witness tampering, charges that carried additional weight because of the presence of a child witness. His attorney had negotiated the plea partly to spare Emma the trauma of a full trial, recognizing that his client's fate had been sealed the moment his daughter spoke those devastating truths to Rex, Dr. Sarah Chun, who had documented every step of Emma's recovery, stood in the legislative gallery with tears of professional pride in her eyes. The little girl she had struggled to reach for months was now advocating for other traumatized children with the wisdom of someone who had walked through darkness and emerged into light. Emma's case had already prompted 3 other states to implement victim assistance dog programs, and the research data from her breakthrough was revolutionizing trauma therapy protocols nationwide. "When bad things happen to kids," Emma continued, her voice carrying clearly through the legislative chamber's sound system, "sometimes we get too scared to talk about it. But Rex taught me that some secrets are too big and too important to keep inside. Rex helped me be brave." Judge Patricia Williams watched from the gallery, remembering that first day when Emma had been carried into her courtroom like a broken doll. The precedent set by allowing Rex to participate in legal proceedings had withstood every appeal and challenge, creating new pathways for justice in cases involving traumatized witnesses. The Martinez case was now taught in law schools across the country as an example of how innovation and compassion could work together to serve justice. Officer Tom Bradley and Rex had become celebrities in their own right, traveling to conferences and training sessions across the nation. The Phoenix Police Department reported that funding for their K-9 Victim Assistance Program had increased by 400%, allowing them to train 12 additional therapy dogs. Rex himself seemed to understand his elevated status, carrying himself with the dignity of a dog who knew he had changed the world. Foster mother Linda Peterson, who had officially adopted Emma 3 months earlier, watched her daughter with the pride of someone who had witnessed a miracle unfold in real time. The quiet, loving home she provided had become Emma's sanctuary, a place where healing could happen at a child's pace, where nightmares could be soothed with patience and love, where a little girl could learn to trust the world again. Some grown-ups might think kids are too little to help other kids, Emma said, her confidence growing with each word. But I'm not too little. My voice might be small, but it's big enough to help other kids find their voices too. The legislative session that followed Emma's testimony resulted in the unanimous passage of the Emma's Voice Act, legislation that provided funding for victim assistance dog programs in all Arizona counties and established protocols for their use in legal proceedings involving child witnesses. The law also mandated specialized training for judges, attorneys, and court personnel in trauma-informed approaches to child testimony. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had first suggested Rex's involvement, received a commendation from the governor and was promoted to head the state's new Victim Assistance Innovation Task Force. Her bold decision to think outside traditional law enforcement protocols had created ripple effects that extended far beyond one courtroom, influencing policy and practice throughout the criminal justice system. A most profound transformation, however, belonged to Emma herself. The little girl who had once been trapped in silence now spoke at schools, conferences, and community events about the importance of telling the truth, even when it was scary. Her message was simple but powerful. Everyone deserves to feel safe. Everyone's voice matters, and sometimes the best friends come in unexpected forms. Rex can't talk with words like people do, Emma explained to the legislators, reaching down to pat her canine companion's golden head. But he talks with his heart, and sometimes that's the best kind of talking. He told my heart that it was safe to use my voice again. As Emma concluded her testimony and walked confidently from the podium, Rex padding beside her with his usual gentle dignity, everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. A child who had been silenced by trauma had not only found her voice again, but had used it to create lasting change that would protect other vulnerable witnesses for generations to come. The case that began with 2 whispered words, "Good boy," had evolved into a national movement that proved the smallest voices could carry the greatest power. Emma Martinez and Rex had shown the world that justice wasn't just about punishment and procedure, but about creating space for healing, truth, and hope to flourish. In the months that followed, Emma continued to thrive. She started kindergarten with enthusiasm, made friends easily, and showed no signs of the selective mutism that had once trapped her in silence. Her nightmares became less frequent, her laughter more common, and her trust in the world around her slowly but steadily rebuilt. Rex returned to his regular duties with the Phoenix Police Department, but remained a frequent visitor to Emma's home. Their bond, forged in a moment of desperate need, had become a lasting friendship that continued to inspire everyone who witnessed it. And in courtrooms across America, therapy dogs began taking their places beside frightened witnesses, carrying on the legacy that Emma and Rex had begun. Their story proved that sometimes justice requires not just laws and procedures, but love, patience, and the recognition that healing and truth often walk hand in hand toward a better future. The silence was broken. The truth was spoken. The healing had begun. And it all started with a little girl, a golden retriever, and 2 words that changed everything. Good boy.